We are going to start in just a moment. Yeah, but that's going to be towards the end, so you can take a seat wherever you would like. I would recommend over that way. That's where the majority of the seats are. Yes, there are. Oh, I know a couple of juries, so I don't know where Jury Stone is at. Okay. Well, since the ceremony is about to start, I would go take a seat, and I will help you find Jerry after the ceremony. No problem. Hey guys, I would recommend going that way. That's where a lot of the seats are left. Looking for a seat. 2 seats, yeah, I think the majority of seats are over that way, so that would be the best spot. Yeah. No problem.
And by the way, those 2 seats right there, you don't think
they might be actually. Yeah. No problem. The majority of the seats are over that way, guys. I would recommend going over that way. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Wow! Wow, stand up!
know these are empty, but we have close.
Man, do we need water?
I'll take it empty.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. My name is Susan Marinoff-Zausner, and I have the privilege, and I will say especially on a day like today, of serving as the president of the Intrepid Sea and Space Museum. And on behalf of our Board of Trustees, I would like to welcome former crew members, family, friends to the 75th commissioning anniversary ceremony of your USS Intrepid. Welcome home. So, before we begin, the heat is very real. We realize that. I only have a 2-hour speech. But crew members, you do have hats. We have some extras if you need. You have fans. I see that you're using the fans. There's suntan lotion. But there is a relief station available to my left, to your right. I ask that you use it. Flag down our team. We're here to serve you. Please be careful. Now, to begin our extraordinary weekend, I ask that you please rise as the United States Navy Color Guard advances our national colors, and please remain standing for the performance of our national anthem by the Navy Band Northeast. Advance, present the colors.
Forward, march!
Thank you to the United States Navy Color Guard, and thank you to the Navy Band Northeast for that beautiful, beautiful performance. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. I would like to extend a special welcome to those on stage with me today, the co-chairman of the Intrepid Museum, Mr. Ken Fisher, vice chairman of the Intrepid Museum, Mr. Mel Immergut, President and CEO of Huntington Ingalls Industries, parent company of Newport News Shipbuilding, which built this very ship you are sitting on the deck of, Mr. Mike Petters, New York State Assemblymember, the Honorable Linda Rosenthal, and the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral John Richardson. I'd also like to welcome Intrepid trustee, astronaut, former NASA administrator, Major General Charles Bolden, retired U.S. Marine Corps. Former NASA astronaut, flew 2 missions to prepare the Space Hubble telescope, and he's a senior advisor to the Intrepid Museum, Mr. Mike Massimino. On Monday, August 16, 1943, this engineering marvel USS Intrepid was commissioned. 75 years later to the day, we are thrilled to host more than 340 of its former crew members from 37 states from all eras of a ship's history to return to celebrate the Intrepid's 75 years of service to our country. Absolutely. Many of you are returning to the Intrepid for the very first time since you've served, reuniting with shipmates you haven't seen in decades, sharing memories with friends and family, and of course, honoring fallen comrades. Among those here with us are 6 of our greatest generation, and 3 of those are plank owners, those who served on our very first crew. Men like Ralph Borker, a Purple Heart recipient who traveled here by himself by train from Nevada, exemplifying just how important and how poignant this gathering is. Oh. And Daniel Watkins, 94 years old, who joins us today from Alabama. Daniel survived kamikaze attacks that killed nearly 70 of his comrades. And when we spoke with Daniel, he said, I'm 94, my kids asked me what I'd like to do, and I told them I want to see the Intrepid again. So we are honored that you are both here with us today. And the men of Intrepid, they continue to make an impact and carry on the legacy of service to our nation. Senator John McCain, a truly great American, served aboard this great aircraft carrier Intrepid, flying A-1 Sky Raiders off the deck in the early 1960s. Jim Larry Hendren, here today, was the only attorney on board when he served on Intrepid from 66 to 67. He later became a federal judge nominated by George H.W. Bush in 1991, and he's now a senior U.S. District Judge in the United States District Court for the Western District of Arkansas. Welcome. But these, we know, are but a few examples of your continued impact, with hundreds of other stories to tell. And to fully understand the meaning of this milestone, it's important to go back to the ship's beginnings. Construction of Intrepid began just days before the devastation of the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor in 1941. It was commissioned in Newport News, Virginia, the namesake of the company that built it, which is so brilliantly represented today. It was first commanded by Thomas L. Sprague. And for those of you who were here 5 years ago for the celebration of our 70th, perhaps you recall these words from the very first edition of the Intrepid newspaper, powerful and worthy of repeating. And I quote, "All hands have done a real Navy job in fitting out our ship. We are ready to take her over. We are raring to go to make every minute from here on out count toward developing the finest fighting team, officers, men, ship, that we are capable of. The enemy shall know well in fear and trepidation that we exist. Intrepid, splendid name for a United States naval vessel. All that the name implies might well be our motto. And with this goal ever in sight, we shall mete out proper punishment and thorough defeat to the enemy. We know our God, our country, and our loved ones expect this of us. Intrepid, the watch is set." The ship played a vital role in turning the tide of the Pacific theater in World War II. Its crew was part of a floating force that battled the Japanese Navy from island to island, from Leyte Gulf to Okinawa. 5 kamikaze attacks and 1 direct hit from a torpedo, which took the lives of more than 100 brave men, could not sink it. Battle scar after battle scar, Intrepid kept coming back, each set of extensive repairs giving the ship new life and new upgrades. After World War II, Intrepid continued to answer our nation's call during the 1950s and 1960s. The ship participated in naval exercises to maintain the fleet's readiness and traveled to foreign ports to show support for American allies in the Cold War. In 1962, Intrepid was reclassified as an anti-submarine warfare carrier with a new mission of tracking Soviet submarines. The ship also served as a NASA recovery vessel during the space race, plucking astronauts Scott Carpenter, Gus Grissom, and John Young from the Atlantic after splashing down from their missions orbiting this Earth. Later that decade, Intrepid served 3 tours in Vietnam. The ship's crew toiled tirelessly while its pilots faced enemy fire on their missions over North and South Vietnam. 3 pilots became prisoners of war, and 21 men lost their lives in combat on operational accidents. Intrepid was decommissioned in 1974 and the ship was ticketed for the scrapyard, but appalled by that notion and defying cynics and detractors, New York real estate developer Zachary Fisher, a tireless advocate for our military and their families, set out to preserve the ship and its storied history for future generations. And we're thrilled to have Ken Fisher, Zachary's nephew, here today. After its 31 years in the U.S. Navy, Intrepid was brought to New York and took up a new mission to honor, educate, and inspire as a world-class museum that today hosts more than 1 million visitors per year. So here at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum, we preserve the ship's history with reverence, with pride, and with purpose, using the lessons of the past to shape a brighter future. We shed light on the ship's innovation, the technology that was a stepping stone to the future in nationally recognized STEM and leadership programs that serve more than 40,000 students each year. And we continue to examine its legacy, your legacy, through compelling tours and dynamic talks. But when we speak of Intrepid, we are really speaking of the men who worked on its decks. We are speaking of you, the crew members. We tell your stories. We use the ship itself and all of its remarkable artifacts to bridge your past to our collective future. Be proud that your ship is now accessible, it's inclusive, and it's diverse. And it is a welcoming place for all, and it continues to serve. We serve individuals on the autism and cognitive spectrum and their families with sensory-sensitive programming. We serve those who are blind and deaf, and we serve those with dementia. We have profound programming for service members returning with PTS and their families. And we teach teachers through our professional development programs about World War II, the Cold War, and Vietnam. They earn credits, and they bring this curriculum back to the classroom and the community. And your stories are not sequestered to New York alone. They reach across the United States and around the world, both in person and virtually. We are proud to perpetuate your legacy, and what drives us every day is our desire to make you as proud of your ship today as you were then. Your service, your ingenuity, and bravery are our guiding light as we strive to inspire tomorrow's leaders, innovators, and explorers. You define Intrepid then and now, and you infuse this behemoth of steel, this hallowed ground, with humanity. So today, and this entire weekend, is about you, who represent the 50,000 men of Intrepid. We honor you, we salute you, and we thank you. And I ask the former crew members, please stand so that we might recognize you. At the conclusion of today's ceremony, all of our returning crew members will receive a commemorative 75th Anniversary Challenge coin. To honor your service at Intrepid, we will now have a special presentation of this challenge coin to a representative of each era of the ship's history. Joining me in that recognition are members of today's Navy, those who have followed in your footsteps. So I will ask, and we will keep the standing at bay because of the heat, but former crew members who served from 1969 to 1974 during Intrepid's last years of service, allow us to recognize you. Receiving the coin on behalf of your era is Larry Hafer. Former crew members from 1966 to 1968 during Intrepid's 3 tours in Vietnam, allow us to recognize you. Receiving the coin on behalf of your era, Mr. Ralph Slane. Former crew members who served from 1952 to 1965 during the Cold War, allow us to recognize you. Receiving the coin on behalf of your era, Ira Gawans. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today 6 former crew members of the greatest generation, those who served in World War II and until the first decommissioning in 1947, including 3 plank owners. They will each receive a coin from our current generation of Navy sailors: Keith Butterfield, Ed Coyne, Ralph Forker, Jerry Gottlieb, John Kiselak, and Daniel Watkins. Please accept this as a token of our gratitude and allow us to recognize you. So I must acknowledge those who are members of our former Crew Members Association from across all years, and those who are volunteers at the museum who work so hard to share this ship's history with our visitors. Former Crew Members Association, please rise and thank you for all that you do. And finally, to those of you here in memory of a USS Intrepid crew member, we thank you so much for joining us today to honor your loved ones, and we ask at this time for everyone to rise so we may honor and remember all of Intrepid's fallen. Please be seated. Crew members, your stories are remarkable. Your efforts from defending our freedom to coming here today are invaluable and inspirational, and you, our former crew members, are the reason we're here today and cannot thank you enough. And I must, though, take a moment to acknowledge the staff at the Intrepid who has been working on this for 2 years to bring you all together, and it's been led by Alice Stryker, Kelly McLaughlin, and Alexis Marianne. You have all spoken to them. Please give them a round. Every team member has been passionate about making this day happen, and you better mark your calendars for 5 years from now. We all feel privileged, we feel humbled to be able to collect, learn, and deliver your stories. We're inspired by you, and you help to inspire and allow us to carry our mission out to promote the understanding, the awareness and understanding of history, science, and service in order to honor our heroes, educate the public, and inspire our youth. It is now my pleasure to introduce a man who is a tireless champion, not only for this museum, but for all military personnel, veterans, and their families. His entire family's dedication is the reason Intrepid has continued her heroic journey since its decommissioning in 1974. He is co-chairman of the Intrepid Board of Trustees, a senior partner of Fisher Brothers, and chairman of Fisher House, a network of 78 comfort homes in operation across the country and in Europe, where military and veterans' families can stay at no cost while a loved one receives medical treatment. He served as chairman of the 2016 Invictus Games in Orlando and has been presented with multiple awards for his support of our nation's armed forces. He is a man that never rests. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ken Fisher.
Thank you, Susan, and we need to thank you too, not only for making this day so special, but for your passion and your dedication to this museum, and of course those who work with you their devotion is equally as inspiring. So thank you, Susan. Thanks to the staff. It's hard to believe that 40 years ago, my late uncle Zachary Fisher decided to embrace what had never before been accomplished, to rescue a piece of history, but not just any piece of history, an Essex-class World War II aircraft carrier destined for the scrap heap, then bring it to this great city and turn it into a floating museum. The words themselves made the task sound impossible, and many close to Zach told him it could never be done. I remember certain members of the family saying, "Zach, you're crazy." Now, hard work was nothing new to my uncle or his brothers. Building a 1 million square foot office building seemed easy in comparison. But Zach was determined, and over the next few years he worked tirelessly with the U.S. Navy and the federal government, recognizing the need for local government involvement. He formed a public-private partnership with New York City that's become the cornerstone of everything that our family does now. And he did all of this with money from his own pocket. Finally, in November 1981, the USS Intrepid sailed triumphantly into New York Harbor one final time, to be more permanently here at Pier 86. After extensive renovations, the Intrepid opens its bulkheads to the public almost 1 year later. Now, though my uncle never served in uniform, he was driven by a fierce determination to give back to a nation that had given so much to him and his family. And I know he would have loved to have been here today to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the commissioning of the Fighting Eye with you and pay tribute to the 342 crewmen, including plank owners, that are here today. Indeed, all those who served this nation aboard her decks. He always knew that your service and your sacrifice, your separation from family, your living under the constant threat of injury and even death was something that needed to be honored and revered. He called all of our military our greatest national treasure because together with their families, they selflessly serve and give so much to this nation and get so little in return. But as I've said many times before, just thanking you for your service is not enough anymore. That our actions must speak louder than our words. Zach's actions certainly echoed loudly through the canyons of the skyline that he and his brothers helped to shape. Zach's vision to preserve Intrepid and her legacy was rooted in 3 concepts: to honor our veterans of all conflicts, especially the men who fought aboard her, to inspire visitors of her story of patriotism, and to educate people from all walks of life, especially children of future generations, that freedom can only be guaranteed by those brave enough to defend it. And it wasn't just Zachary's vision for Intrepid alone. It was one shared by our entire family. After Zach's passing, my late cousin Tony Fisher, and then my father Arnold Fisher, continued his efforts, as did our predecessors, Charles de Gunsberg and Rich Santulli, who as co-chairs of the board also ensured that Intrepid would be an inspiration to her visitors for years to come. It wasn't our family alone. I would like to recognize the outstanding group of dedicated men and women, our board of trustees, both past and present. Their dedication and commitment to the heritage of this ship has indeed been inspiring. But it is in fact dedication to Intrepid which brings us all here today. 75 years ago, this gallant ship officially took up the duty of serving her country. Over the course of numerous conflicts, she defended our flag and our freedom. Across the Pacific in World War II, in Vietnam, later in the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea during the Cold War. But she was a versatile ship, and she also served as a primary recovery vessel for NASA during the early days of the space program. Attack after attack, injury after injury, this great ship always to return to service better than before. 31 years of service and active duty, followed by an equal amount of time here in Manhattan as our beloved Intrepid Museum, is a track record only a few American Navy vessels can claim. Now as a museum, she's a new marvel of engineering with exhibits that tell important stories, They are the stories of her crew. Stories told in your words, with your uniforms and your medals, revealing the humanity behind the hardware. And today, 1 million visitors a year can attest to that. But no one achieves anything without building upon what already exists. So as you walk her flight deck and along her rails, you may recall memories of far-flung ports of call or the heat of battle. Remember that we are standing here today on your shoulders, just as we stand upon the shoulders of the 270 brave souls who paid the ultimate sacrifice, either on this ship or in the skies above her. Yes, this is Intrepid's day, but it's your day as well. Your valiant service has created an amazing foundation for the future of education and exploration, and that's a wonderful way in which Intrepid continues to serve in much the same way that you guys continue to serve, and veterans of all generations continue serving after they leave the military. Years ago, I heard it said that the Intrepid was the lady in the harbor that bled so that the other lady in the harbor could hold the torch. And for those of you who served aboard her, let that be your legacy. Your valiant service has laid the keel on which sits what today is not only a lasting tribute to service and sacrifice, but will continue to educate future generations on what freedom really costs and why that torch that's held so high just down the river shines so brightly. And I really know that my uncle smiles today, because this ship and the museum that grew from your service has sailed through the oceans of time and has reached out to so many, just the way Zachary Fisher always hoped it would. Thank you for allowing me the honor and the privilege of being part of today's ceremony. May God bless you all. May God bless those crew members no longer with us. And may God continue to bless this, the greatest nation on earth. Thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the privilege and the honor to have the President and CEO of Huntington Ingalls, of which Newport News is a business unit of, and it's very exciting for me that we have somebody so significant representing the builders of the very ship you are sitting on, Mr. Mike Petters.
Well, good morning, and thank you all for having us here today. It's truly an honor to be with you all, the veterans of the Intrepid. You have built a foundation for the future freedom of this country that is pretty staggering. It's also a pleasure for me to be on the dais with my good friend, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Richardson. He and I started the Naval Academy Plebe Summer Program 40 years ago this summer. And let me just tell you that the Navy that you built is in great hands under Admiral Richardson's leadership. I've known him and his family all these years, and I am proud to say that Admiral Richardson's not only a great leader, but he's a great friend. So thank you, John. Huntington Ingalls Industries' 2 shipbuilding divisions have now built more than 1,000 ships in the last 132 years. And each one is unique in its own way, but a few do go on to become truly legendary. And that distinction certainly applies to the USS Intrepid. Any discussion of this ship has to start with the fact that it was the most frequently hit carrier in the United States Navy fleet. As William L. Tazewell wrote in the First Century, his history of HII's Newport News Shipbuilding Division, 4 times the Intrepid was battered into flames by Japanese planes, and 4 times she returned to action. Now, as shipbuilders, we take great pride in delivering ships that sail into harm's way. But USS Intrepid is a sobering reminder that nothing can make us more proud than delivering a ship that is tested in battle and then sails out of harm's way. And I can think of no better example of the quality that has permeated our products and services for more than 13 decades. Now, USS Intrepid is unique in so many other ways. Although it was stick-built on a shipway, it was the first major ship at Newport News Shipbuilding to be floated at christening instead of launched. And today we use modular construction to build nuclear-powered aircraft carriers in a dry dock, but that floating innovation still continues. In fact, we are currently building and planning for the future float and launch of the John F. Kennedy, the second Gerald R. Ford class aircraft carrier. And in the early 1950s, the USS Intrepid was modernized and recommissioned as an attack carrier. That modernization work was also done at Newport News, and it included the installation of the Navy's first steam catapults. Now, steam catapults have been used on every single aircraft carrier for the last 60 years, including all 10 Nimitz-class carriers, until the Ford was commissioned in 2017 with an electromagnetic aircraft launch system. When USS Intrepid was decommissioned and scheduled to be scrapped, it was members of the ship's crew, some of whom fought those fires during the war, who rallied to save it again and have it preserved as a museum ship. So like more than 6,500 military veterans who work at HII, the USS Intrepid continues to serve, just in a different way. You see, aside from the active duty members of the military, not many people ever have the opportunity to go on one of our ships and see our work firsthand. So we are proud that the craftsmanship of a previous generation of shipbuilders is on prominent display in the largest city in the United States. And more importantly, we are proud that this ship is used as a tool to educate the public and inspire our youth through the awareness and understanding of history, science, and service. And there's one more thing that makes the USS Intrepid not only unique, but remarkable from a historical perspective. The ship's keel was laid down on December 1st, 1941. And if you're paying close attention, you may realize that that was only 6 days before the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. 3 of the battleships damaged in that attack, the USS Pennsylvania, the USS Maryland, and the USS West Virginia, were built at Newport News Shipbuilding. In yet another testament to the quality of the shipyard's work, they all survived. And the next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered his address to Congress requesting a declaration of war. We all know it as the Day of Infamy speech. Hard to believe, but I was not there. But I suspect that something else Roosevelt said in that speech motivated every shipbuilder that worked during World War II, because it still motivates us today. With confidence in our armed forces, he said, and with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. Every HII employee, more than 39,000 men and women, not just in Virginia, but in 42 states, has confidence in our armed forces. And we all have the unbounding determination to do our best every single day in everything that we do. Like the men who served on this ship, the men and women who built it were also intrepid, and we still are. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so very much, and I am pleased now to introduce a great intrepid friend and an outstanding public servant. She has dedicated her entire career to improving the lives of New Yorkers, and she represents the 67th Assembly District, which includes Intrepid's neighborhood. So she has a special presentation, which I would like to call her up to read. If you will welcome, please, ladies and gentlemen, New York State Assembly Member Linda Rosenthal.
Thank you so much. It is my great honor to represent the Intrepid in the New York State Assembly, and as a body, we voted to pass this legislative resolution commemorating the 75th anniversary of the commissioning of the USS Intrepid. I won't read the whole thing, but I will read some important parts. Whereas ships and the brave men and women who crew them play a critical role in the defense of our nation and the protection of citizens of the great state of New York. And whereas WWII-era, the following former crew members will be attending the festivities: 11 from World War II, including 6 plank owners who served on the Intrepid's first cruise, 111 from the early Cold War, 87 from the Vietnam War, and 56 from the late Cold War. And whereas the ship served in several world conflicts, including the Cold War, the Vietnam War, as a recovery vessel in the 1960s, whereas fortunately, New York City philanthropist Zachary Fisher campaigned to preserve the ship and its storied history. In August of 1982, the ship opened in New York City as the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. Today, over 1 million visitors each year travel to Pier 86 at 46th Street to tour this museum. Whereas in 1986, the USS Intrepid was officially designated as a National Historic Landmark. And now I'll skip to the end. Resolved that a copy of this resolution suitably engrossed be transmitted to the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. This was adopted in the New York State Assembly on May 31st, 2018. It is my great honor to present this. And thank you to all who served. Thank you for the memories that you're all sharing today. And thank you for serving as a beacon of hope for future generations of our great country. Thank you. Thank you.
It is just once again a tribute, I have to say, and we are so grateful. So thank you so much for the exclamation point of what we mean not only here in New York City, but New York State and beyond. I am proud to introduce a dedicated leader of Intrepid, a longtime vice chairman of the museum. He was chairman of one of Wall Street's premier law firms for almost 20 years. He served for many years on the Defense Business Board of the Department of Defense and on the senior advisory boards of both the United States Southern Command and European Command. He's also recently been serving as an advisor to many four-star admirals with respect to their transitions from military to private sector upon retirement. He is a recipient of the Exceptional Public Service Medal, among the highest civilian awards of the Secretary of Defense. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Mel Immergut.
Thanks, Susan. Today, of course, is a celebration of two things: the great and storied ship we're on board today and that we've talked so much about already, and that literally tens of thousands of brave sailors and aviators who have been her crew members. We are truly blessed today to have as our keynote speaker Admiral John Richardson, who in his role as the 31st Chief of Naval Operations runs the United States Navy, the most powerful naval force in the history of the world. Admiral Richardson is a Naval Academy graduate who spent most of his career in the submarine service. He served on 3 submarines before commanding USS Honolulu, based in Hawaii, in Pearl Harbor. His command of Honolulu resulted in his being awarded the coveted Stockdale Award, given each year to 2 naval recipients for inspirational leadership. Inspirational leadership is in fact the hallmark of Admiral Richardson and his many commands at sea and shore duty in the Pentagon and elsewhere. He's a truly extraordinary naval officer who in his 3 years running the Navy has garnered universal praise both within and without the service. Prior to becoming head of the Navy, Admiral Richardson had a unique job where he was head of the Director of Naval Reactors. This is a special job in the military in that the director is in charge of everything under nuclear power, which includes all of our submarines and nuclear aircraft carriers. Think about that. All of our submarines and carriers. The job is deemed so important that it's the only position in the entire military that is an 8-year assignment, double the normal. President Obama and Secretary of Defense Carter thought that Admiral Richardson was so brilliant and such an inspirational leader that they violated longtime Navy policy by appointing him CNO, even though he had only spent 2 years out of the prescribed 8 in the naval reactor's position. The Admiral loves this ship. He was our Memorial Day speaker 2 years ago, and when I called him up several months ago to ask him to be our keynote speaker today, he responded like that, of course. Admiral Richardson, on behalf of the museum, its staff, and our trustees, and of course our guests today, former crew members and their families, we're delighted to welcome you back on this august occasion.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Immigrant Mel, for that way too generous introduction. I think what he was trying to say in a very charitable way, kind of a New York nice way, is I'm the only guy ever to be fired as the Director of Naval Reactors before the tenure, right? I mean, that's kind of what it amounts to. I've got to say also that it is absolutely fantastic to be back here in New York City. It's been a thrilling day for me. I was honored to represent the Navy, and with a group of sailors, many of whom you've seen today, we got to open the New York Stock Exchange. So we rang the bell, something you can only do here in New York. So it's what a thrill. And then immediately it took off to a 300-point jump. So go Navy, right? And you know, New York in my mind has always been a Navy town, right? It has always embraced the Navy. We come up here every year, we do Fleet Week, and the sailors that have come up here and just go ashore in New York, and the way that the city embraces our Navy, and in fact all of our soldiers, airmen and Marines, it is legendary, and so it is fantastic to be back here in New York. Thank you very much for all of the support from the city of New York. And I'd especially like to welcome the more than 300 former crew members of USS Intrepid. And I think, you know, we've got a very, very good sense of the generations of crew members that have served on board and are all represented here today. The greatest generation, the World War II sailors that sailed on board, the Cold War, sort of the early Cold War and the late Cold War, the Vietnam era, all of those generations represented here, decades and decades of selfless service, all here. And one of the things that this weekend brings is very, very special. You know, with all of the crew members here to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the commissioning, you get a chance, if you haven't already, if you visit the Intrepid, to speak to some of these sailors. And you get to hear their memories and their stories. This is living history. And so I encourage you to take the time, hear their stories. Some of them are actually true, right? And so, so this is a priceless opportunity. I see a lot of the sea stories going on in the audience, and I've told a few myself, so I know how that goes, all right? Listen, I'll tell you what, we're here, and it's in the middle of August, and it is hot, and so I will try to be brief, but we don't want to hurry through it too much because this is just such a special time. And if you've been to a ship's commissioning, you know what an amazing event that is. And you know, my good friend Mike Petters talked about the professionalism and the care of the craftsmen and welders and shipbuilders who put the ship together. But it is on that day of commissioning that the ship transforms from a machine into a ship and a crew. The words that are spoken are bring this ship to life on commissioning day, and that's exactly what happened 75 years ago today. And we are especially honored to, once again, I think, a great round of applause, show our respect for the members who were there on that day, the plank owners of the USS Intrepid. So let's really give it up for them. You know, the plank owners of that ship and all who served on Intrepid, to be honest, I don't think any of them knew. None of us do exactly what demands will be placed on us when you raise your right hand, you take that oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and then you get your sea bag packed and you report aboard and you get underway and you sail into harm's way. In 1943, when Intrepid served her first time at sea, the mission was clear. It was to fight and win against the Axis powers. The future of the world literally hung in the balance. And that purpose was all it took. The combination of that focused mission and the oath, the commitment to that oath of all of her sailors, was the thing that fueled Intrepid through all of her gallant service during that war. In the Marshall Islands, Kwajalein, Roy, Namur, places made famous by Intrepid's actions in those battles. That purpose carried the Intrepid to victory in Peleliu and Leyte Gulf, to Truk, to Aleut, and to Kyushu. But the sense of purpose is really only the recipe for victory. Intrepid was well led and well manned. Her crew was adaptable, resilient, tough, and resourceful. And they remained completely adaptable under the unforeseeable demands of combat. One example stands out in my mind very clearly, and this is another thing I'm going to ask for a show of hands at the end to see if this is actually true. On the night of 17 February 1944, an aerial torpedo attack struck Intrepid on her starboard quarter. All right, so that's the back starboard side of the ship. Okay, the torpedo struck 15 feet below the waterline and flooded several compartments. And it also, at this kind of back where the machinery room is, right, it jammed the Intrepid's rudder hard to port, and you couldn't steer the ship. The ship moved now in a permanent left turn. Now the captain of the ship, who was the commissioning captain, Captain Sprague, who later went on to become a vice admiral, he initially kept the ship on course by using the port screw to offset this turn, right? So the ship was able to sort of stay on course, but then the winds picked up and they started turning the ship against her will towards Tokyo, all right? Now, Captain Sprague confessed that a little bit later, at that time in the war, I wasn't really interested in going to Tokyo, all right? It wasn't the direction that I wanted to go. And so to get the ship back on course, the crew, resourceful as they were, fashioned an actual sail out of scrap canvas. And they sailed this ship with this sail on board from Micronesia to Pearl Harbor. That's thousands of miles, right? This is not like steaming down the river. And then, the shipyard in Pearl Harbor turned to, got Intrepid repaired, and got her back into the fight. Now, anybody on board for that period of time, is that true? Yeah, they say yes. It's true? All right, so you heard it here. That's a true story. There she was. That's a true sea story. Amazing, all right? Amazing. And as amazing it is, though, it was almost the routine to be amazing on Intrepid. This is what the circumstances of war demanded. And Intrepid's crew met that challenge over and over, adapted to the situation, kept their ship in the fight all the way to the end at VJ Day. And then they continued, right? The world changed at the end of that war. And we entered into a new type of conflict, a Cold War. And Intrepid adapted to those needs as well, continuing to protect America from attack, continuing to promote our prosperity and influence around the world. And as you've heard, she underwent a number of different roles, an assault carrier, and then an anti-submarine warfare carrier. And in so doing, she modernized. She brought along the technological developments of the Cold War, an incredible example of versatility under rapidly changing conditions. You know, think through the historical shifts that were going on during those years, how hard it is to keep up. If you read it, it stuns you with the pace of change. Intrepid was leading out the entire way. And so, standing on this hallowed deck today, we are reminded of the unforgiving nature of sailing at sea, both in peacetime and especially in war. And we pause to remember that while we are here to celebrate the incredible 75-year life of Intrepid, there are our shipmates, 270, who made the ultimate sacrifice, who paid the ultimate price in the commitment to that oath of office that they took when they started their service. And it's due to the accomplishments and sacrifices of Intrepid's crew, those living and those who have passed away, preserving her legacy here in New York City. That's why Intrepid here in the harbor is so vitally important. The preservation of Intrepid, as you heard, represents a Herculean effort, an incredible amount of civic engagement, and the mobilization of a ton of money, right? Ships, it takes a commitment to keep this museum and Intrepid looking as fine as she does today. I think it also reflects the historic connection between Intrepid and New York City. Intrepid did many of her major modernizations at the New York shipyard, right? We have history together here between Intrepid service and the city of New York. And as I said, it represents a good bond between the New York City and the Navy as a whole. It's a great symbol of that. So the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum, its network of supporters, the tremendous leadership here on the podium with me, thank you for mobilizing everything it took to be able to bring us together, celebrate this day, to bring all of the crew, former crew together, to celebrate together. This would not be possible without the vision of those who saved this ship from scrap and continue to invest in it every day. So in conclusion, to the crew and of the Intrepid, let me assure you, as the leader of today's Navy, you and your example will never be forgotten. We remember your adaptability, your toughness, your sense of purpose, and actually your selflessness. You know, the one thing, if you get a chance to talk to an Intrepid sailor, you will get a deep sense of the humility of those who served. They will say to you, I don't know what the big deal is, we were just doing our job, right? But let me tell you, it was a big damn deal, right? You saved the world from tyranny, not just once, but several times. And your contribution for that will continue to inspire our sailors today as we raise our right hand, as we pack our sea bags, as we get on board and get underway. You are the wind that fills our sails and inspire us. And we could do no better than to emulate everything that you have taught us through your service. So, This is a weekend of celebration, a weekend of remembrance. It's a festive time. But at the end of today and at the end of the weekend, every one of us is going to go back to our rooms and we're going to lay our heads down after a great day. And I would ask you, each of you, before you nod off to sleep, say a quick prayer for the sailors of the Intrepid. Say a quick prayer for those who are living among us. Say a prayer for those who have passed on. Pray for the caretakers of their memory, and pray for all of our sailors, soldiers, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen who carry on your tradition of service and are deployed today, some in very dangerous places, so that we can carry on this gift you gave us, this very fragile thing called freedom. Thank you all, and God bless.
I will say we are so proud and comforted that the United States Navy is under your command. Thank you, sir, very, very much for your words, and how wonderful. So, ladies and gentlemen, while this does conclude the ceremony, this is also the beginning, as our CNO just said, of many, many celebrations and activities for you. We have opened up spaces in time just for you to do some private behind-the-scenes tours of sickbay, our diesel generator room, the island, and secondary con. We have events and tours all throughout the weekend. We have an area, the Solutions Center, on our hangar bay that has all the answers to your questions, all the sign-ups for the activities. And I will ask, before I conclude here, that following immediately after the ceremony, we do ask each crew member, please approach the stage. We would like to get a photo to commemorate this moment on this day. And with that, we all at Intrepid thank you so much again for your service, and your service allows us to do what we do today. God bless you, God bless the Intrepid, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.